Pro-Life Jen. This is Kristan Hawkins. Welcome to a new episode of the Explicitly Pro-Life podcast. Joining me today is a superstar that you may not have ever met before. You might have heard about them at the National Pro-Life Summit. It's Support After Abortion and their CEO, Lisa Rowe. Lisa has spent the last 2 decades equipping and empowering thousands of at-risk children, hurting adults, and broken families to find hope, healing, and restoration. I am so excited to have her on the show today. As you all know, we've been talking a lot about what life will be like in a post-Roe v. Wade America. And this, I think, is something, Lisa, we've got to discuss about what it's going to be like and what we're going to have to do, what we're going to be called to do in the pro-life movement, especially for those who've had a past abortion in a post-Roe America. So thanks for joining me.
Absolutely, Kristin. Thank you so much for having me. And it's been a joy being partnered with you guys as we've done this work together, really helping to equip and educate your students and the world really understand how to talk about abortion, that there's so many people, Kristin, that have been impacted by abortion that our lives touch. And I really think that this topic today is going to really encourage, but also challenge your listeners.
Good. That's what we need. We need to get a kick in the butt. That's why people listen to this podcast. It's not for easy consumption. Okay, so I guess start out, Lisa. Tell everybody, if they've never heard about Support Abortion, why did you all launch Support After Abortion, and what is it that you all are uniquely called and doing right now in the pro-life movement?
So the impetus behind Support After Abortion was initially just for Southwest Florida. We were concerned why more and more people weren't reaching out for help after abortion, knowing that millions are hurting afterwards. Where were they? Why weren't they coming into the pregnancy center that I was leading? Why weren't they coming into our Catholic resources and other resources? And so we began to investigate that. And in a matter of 3 years, we did a lot of anecdotal research. We had a team member who went through about 12 different groups, and we started just asking big leaders questions. Where are they? What's going on? And then to complement that, we conducted 4 consumer research studies that helped to support what we were learning on the front lines. And Kristin, you know, what we learned was that there's a lot of people doing a lot of great work in this field, except that many of the programs look identical. So they have different names, but inside the cover of the book are a lot of scripture and a lot of Bible-based content, which is wonderful, but it only serves a certain population. And so we were missing this entire demographic of people that weren't ready for a faith journey. We also looked at the marketing facets, and many people's programs are not named in a way that you can recognize them as an abortion healing program. And then the biggest thing for me that I am most excited and propelled by is that abortion has always landed in the political and religious realms, and it hasn't landed in a human connection realm, especially for therapists and helpers. And so becoming more aware of how the culture has kind of shaped us and groomed us to not see this as an issue that people are faced with and that they need healing from. And so we are out at Support After Abortion to help the world better understand that if we don't walk with compassion as it relates to abortion, we're missing many people that we know and love, missing opportunities to talk to them, missing opportunities to invite them into greater freedom. Leaders across the world don't know that each other exists, and so we're helping to connect those leaders. And then ultimately, Kristin, because of this post-Roe America that we're talking about, we don't have the capacity right now to serve all of the men and women that when they start seeing abortion and the overturn or whatever we're going to see all over our news station, our blog posts, our social media, and they start coming out of the woodwork because they're questioning, what was my decision right or wrong, or I've been living with this for years, and we don't have the services to provide them. And so Support After Abortion is helping to mitigate all those gaps, bring people together across the world, and helping to bring awareness to the issue of healing after abortion.
That's fantastic. What I've been kind of referring students to Support After Abortion when I'm on campuses. What kind of resources can pro-life advocates find on Support After Abortion that they can refer folks to?
That's great. So the very first resource is that we have a hotline, and we also a crisis line, and we also have ways that clients can reach out to us on social media. And when they reach out, they're met with somebody who has experienced abortion, who has training in this capacity, and we'll meet them with non-judgmental, confidential care. So that's the first thing we're able to provide, is just a place for people to reach out and start the conversation. The second thing that they can find when they visit our website is, as leaders, resources for how to start a program. What is going on in their communities? What can they do? What's the first step they can do, from a sidewalk advocate all the way through a pregnancy center, clinical covering, whatever that looks like. We have OBGYNs that reach out to us and say, what can I do to help my clients that come in and have experienced abortion? And then, of course, we have our training platform, which provides that hand-holding care at your own pace on how to start and continue to follow through with raising your own level of care in your community.
That's awesome. So you guys are very much a one-stop shop. That's even more resources than I thought you all had on the website. So that's fantastic. Wow. I guess going kind of deeper into this post-Roe topic, have you started to see, with abortion being discussed more and more on the nightly news, it's on social media, I'm getting the panicked emails and text messages from Planned Parenthood and Feminist Majority and whatever, Abortion Access Front all the time. Have you started to see an increase in women and men reaching out, looking for help? Do you see that? Do you see increases when abortion's talked about more nationally, more people asking for help?
Yes. And so I wouldn't say that we've started to see the influx from Roe just yet, but what I can reference, Kristin, is when New York started to have, maybe it was 2 years ago or a little bit over 2 years ago, when we started to hear about all the changes in New York state law and all of that. I mean, overnight, we grew our influence on social media by 2,000 people responding to comments and conversations. And so, yes, that's what I reference as I begin to think about what this looks like as it becomes more mainstream conversation. That definitely was an indicator that people will come out of the woodwork and have these conversations more loudly.
Wow. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, really, I've been kind of nervous, panicked, or whatever adjective you want to use, thinking about post-Roe America, all the things that we've built at Students for Life, the students that we've trained, and now it's like the rubber is going to meet the road, right? Like, did we do what we were supposed to do? Are we going to have enough trained folks who know their marching orders in the states? I'm getting more panicked about the support for those who chose abortion, had an icky feeling in their gut, went through with the abortion anyway because mom, dad, boyfriend, husband influenced them, told them it was the right decision, but never really settled with it, haven't come to terms with it. And then all of a sudden, the Supreme Court's going to come out and say, oh yeah, oops, big mistake. It really was an egregious decision. How do you think that's going to affect the emotional well-being of so many post-abortive men and women that are walking wounded, in our country?
Well, Kristin, I first just want to compliment you for having such an innovative and big picture mind, because you are uncommon. The way that you can see that, and the way that you are caring, and the way that you can envision a world that would question that isn't something that I've seen across the board. And so I think more leaders could hear your heart in that and be encouraged to consider their own, communities and the own places that they provide services, because if we're not thinking about that, we're missing a huge opportunity. And so in terms of how and what this might look like, you're exactly right. We are looking at people. You don't wake up at 15 years old, 18 years old, 25 years old and say, time for me to have an abortion. I've been dreaming of this day my whole life. Or, the man that wakes up and he doesn't wake up and say, I've been waiting for this phone call from my girlfriend my whole life. No, it doesn't work like that. These are men and women who are much like you and I. They have hearts that beat just like ours, and they've experienced their own series of vulnerabilities that led them to make decisions, vulnerable decisions that have consequences. And, and they are finding themselves without the tools to make better decisions. And so when we think of these people, they might look like they have it all together on the outside, but really they're numbing the pain with substances or other addictions, or anxiety has ridden their life, suicidal ideation, depression. And so as the news stations start to just blast this, as we start to have more mainstream conversations about this, Kristin, it is my belief that all of those vulnerabilities are going to lead to like an explosion of like, I don't know what to do with this. I've been numbing all these years. I haven't talked about this. I haven't had any real intimate conversations that have led to any hope and healing. And now what I've been using all this time to stay quiet and to kind of keep it isn't going to work because it's in my face all the time. And we have a real dilemma on our hands to make sure that we are caring for those people.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's anyone who does grassroots pro-life work, you get reminded frequently about the wounded people in our country, those who come up and steal our, handmade rubber fetal models. And like, why are they stealing fetuses? I mean, that's like the biggest thing we're having to deal with on campuses right now is they're stealing our fetuses, and these are $200 kits. Mm-hmm. And it's like, why are you so upset by a fetal model? It's been, and I think that crazy behavior is only going to get worse because you have very wounded folks walking around. I want to ask you about a couple of different things. And because you're in this space, I think you can speak into it. I think you can speak into it a little bit better than other folks. So recently in Washington, D.C., there were 5 children who were aborted through late-term abortion. Mm-hmm. These children very possibly were killed through infanticide. They were given to some anti-abortion activists, pro-life activists on the ground. They turned those children over to the police, demanded an autopsy. We've been calling for justice for these 5 children. The city of DC, said they're not going to do an autopsy, whatever. We're going to keep pushing at them and hopefully using Congress, because it's Washington, D.C. They're not a state, thank goodness, to drive that autopsy, because we're very confident that this abortionist who is a predatory abortionist has been committing illegal abortions. But how has the effect of those images been on post-abortive men and women? Have you had any conversations? Because I've been on campuses, and I was actually shocked at how many pro-abortion students knew about the images and had seen the images, which to me was very shocking, because I was like, wait a minute, you just spent 45 minutes yelling at me about how it's not a human being, it's not living, it's a blob of tissue. Then why do you care about somebody having 5 fetuses in their home and demanding an autopsy? Like, what? Why do you care about these images? Like, what's the big deal? Like, if it's nothing, then why do you care? I know there's been some conversations on social media about what's the best way to use these images and honor these victims and seek justice for these victims in a way that is just also respectful for those who are hurting from past abortions.
Kristin, that's a great question. I'm always very considerate of my audience, because most of the women and men that we work with know what they've done. They know that they've killed their baby. They know that they're a murderer. But when we're screaming in their face that they're a murderer, when we're screaming in their face, you killed your baby, when we're screaming, here's your baby and this is what it looked like, or this is what you did to it, they are already shaming themselves. We further shame them. And Kristin, what I've learned from men and women who've experienced abortion, after an abortion, they say, Planned Parenthood or the abortion clinic says, I'm going to be okay. So I feel like I can't return to them. And then I walk outside and I see these murder signs and murder messages. And now I feel like the church or the pro-life community isn't safe to go to. So they find themselves in this middle space, this dark space where they don't know where they fit, who they fit with, and who they can talk to. And so it further shames them oftentimes because, like I said, they already know what they did. They just didn't feel like they had any other options because of the vulnerabilities that I spoke to earlier. And so I think we can do a better job of understanding in any realm who is our audience. And if we're going to talk about murder, if we're going to talk about what a baby looks like, we also need to complement that with a more compassionate language that says, this is what happens in an abortion, but there are people, 1 in 4 people that who've had an abortion, and there is help still from you. And we're not here to shame you. We're here to educate those that don't know. And now we're here to help you as well. So I think we can get better about doing that as we begin this, as we continue this journey of what does this look like and what audience are we speaking to?
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty simple disclaimer to put on you're online when you're sharing these images on social media of these children. And I know there's a debate about, is that showing dignity to the children who've been murdered by showing the images of them? And there's a strenuous debate going on about that. But I do know, we have staff members whose parents who've had abortions, and we've talked about what's the impact when the staff member's parent finds out what their child is doing, and it's led to hard conversations. And then the parent sees the images on their son or daughter's social media. And so I think that's a very simple, but powerful and profound solution is, making sure if you're sharing images of these 5 children to also show your support and compassion, and that there's hope for those who've experienced abortion, and that the images aren't a judgment against those who've also been involved in a past abortion decision. Another thing I wanted to talk to you about, since I've got you on, you've got this wealth of expertise with helping those struggling from past abortion decisions. What are you seeing about chemical abortion? You said something to me a couple months ago when I was in Florida that I've repeated and I've stolen from you. I'm sorry. But anytime I speak about chemical abortion now, I've really been using what you said, I think so eloquently, of, she's returning back to the scene every morning when she goes to brush her teeth. And I think that's very interesting, because we all know women who've had abortions, and they'll talk about how they don't go that way to work anymore. They'll avoid that street, or they've moved out of the city and they never go back, or what happens when women who had abortions go in front of the abortion facility that ended the life of their child. But with chemical abortion, I mean, we're talking about her aborting her child in her bathroom, on her toilet. Have you started to see a rise in cries for help? I mean, I don't know. A lot of us, I think, as pro-life advocates, think of those who seek help for abortion decisions are older, and that they're kind of years removed from the initial abortion decision. With chemical abortion, if she doesn't listen to the abortion facility and looks before she flushes in the toilet, she could very well see her child. Is that increasing, or I guess maybe speeding up the post-abortion regret? Are you seeing a lot of more, as I think it's half of all abortions now are committed with chemical abortion. Are you seeing a change in the post-abortive cries for help?
Absolutely, Kristin. So our trajectory, based on the years that we have knowing what chemical abortion has looked like, we know that 70% of abortions in 2022 will likely be chemical abortions. And we also know that you don't even have to go into a facility anymore to get access to pills, right? Depending on where you are and your level of access, you may not ever see a human being before you swallow your first set of pills. And so what my experience has been in, Kristin, I mean, I led our first Keys to Hope and Healing group early last year. And as I think about those women, they were between 20 and 29 years old, all within 4 years of their abortion experience, many very recent. 6 weeks was one, 2 years was another, months after. They all had experienced chemical abortion. and their stories were so similar. I didn't know what I was to expect. It's being advertised as a missed period pill by Planned Parenthood. And so, for somebody who's been groomed by the culture, is 20 years old and doesn't understand, has always had quick fixes their whole life. I mean, this is a generation that's never not had a cell phone, right? And everything. And Kristin, you remember dial-up internet. I mean, they have no idea what that even is. Like, and I know, even our generations beyond us, like we have things, privileges that they didn't have, but our instant gratification culture hasn't even it is teaching us not even to stop, think, problem solve, become more we're not even doing that. And so we end up in these situations, and halfway through a chemical abortion, we're like, and so thank goodness for APR and the significance there. But a woman that goes all the way through the process because she hasn't stopped to think and then finds herself, right? So this is a vulnerable woman too, who's had a lot of life experience, a trauma, early childhood sexual abuse, parents' divorce, poverty, domestic violence exposure. I mean, you name it, I've heard it. And now here they are in their bathroom, potentially with living children in their apartment, or maybe they're on their work rotation. Like one of my dearest friends was on her hospice nursing rotation when she experienced her abortion. And they have their abortion in their bathrooms, in these common places, and they don't know what to expect. They're not prepared for what they're about to see. And because, like I said, Kristin, so many of them know what they've already committed to. They know what they're doing, and so they're curious. Our curiosity sometimes really gets the best of us. And so I've had women who've told me, I've held my baby in my hand, one woman for 2 hours, because she couldn't place it in the toilet and press the flush button. She hated herself and still hates herself, was suicidal. So going back to the images, I mean, we have a whole world of people who are already going to see it firsthand. They won't need fetal models. They won't need pictures. They will have seen it firsthand. And then, like you said, revisit that crime scene every day until they move or get healing. It's a very, very scary place we're about to enter. Well, that we've already entered, but it's going to continue to get worse.
That's unbelievable. It's very scary. I can't believe you said your trajectory is 70%. I mean, they've used COVID very well to their advantage, I would argue, to try to, force the FDA to drop all of these risk evaluation mitigation strategies. The potential damage to her health from these chemical abortions is very real.
Yeah.
It's scientific, and yet it's just being absolutely glossed over. Something that I also wanted to ask you, we can talk about the dangers to women through chemical abortion. I've done that. There's been a couple of shows on that, so I don't want to get into that. But I don't think I've done a good enough job of going through with viewers and listeners about the risks to her. And do you have maybe kind of your top line messaging points of what is the risk to her when she undergoes this abortion, and the mental health consequences that she may very well suffer from? I usually kind of go through, I spout them off pretty quickly on campuses, but it's fascinating to me because the abortion advocates on campuses are so quick to discount all of them. Yeah. And so I wondered if you have a way of kind of countering that when they just kind of scoff at them and laugh them off like they're not real.
Yeah, so I think it's really important for your audience to know that relief is a very common feeling right after. It is, and it's common and it's normal. It might last weeks, because I've just faced a devastating situation. I've now experienced abortion. I've saw my baby before I flushed it down the toilet, and I don't know what to do with it, but I know that I'm grateful that I'm not pregnant, and I know that I'm grateful that I don't have to think about that anymore.
The immediate crisis is gone.
Correct. And so I think it's really important for us to talk about that, because I think some people get angry that men and women feel that relief initially, but it's human nature to feel that when, we've escaped a car accident, and yes, we're in the ER, but we're relieved that we didn't hurt ourselves, we're not even hurt more, or we feel that as humans. Our heart is what I'm talking about, not our mind, our heart. So sometimes we encounter these folks right afterwards or weeks after, where they are like in a place of saying, I'm relieved. It's after that people begin to start to feel the consequences and to feel the things that you're talking about. Sometimes feel right away, but other times it's not till weeks or months, or they are reminded of it, or they've had time to to have the fog clear and they can see more clearly now, right? Because we know what trauma does to the brain, Kristin. It's like, when you burn your toast in the toaster, like in the house becomes super foggy. That's what happens to our brain. All our morality goes out the window, all of our intellect goes out the window, and we can't smell anything but the toast. We can't see anything but the trauma. It takes time for that smell to leave the kitchen. It takes time for that fog to disappear. It's the same way with our trauma. We have to calm down enough to see, through and above it. And so what I often hear people say is, if I had relationship problems before, they certainly got worse. If I had substance abuse problems before, they've gotten worse. If I was depressed before, they're now worse. If I had isolating issues before, they're now worse. So what we see is a lot of things, because women who find themselves in abortions, like I said earlier, they have vulnerabilities. They likely have been engaging in at-risk behaviors. And so those at-risk behaviors become magnified. And sometimes, Kristin, we find that promiscuity becomes, and women are pregnant again months later, because they're trying to contend with that feeling of, oh my gosh, what did I do? I don't have a relationship anymore. And without those tools, they find themselves down the road injuring themselves even more.
Wow, that's unbelievable. It's fascinating to me, because I'll often read when I'm on campus studies off of PubMed.gov, the NIH's website. And I think a lot of the studies that we see about abortion, the effects of abortion, they're not actually coming from America. They're coming from other countries. Why is that? Can you explain to the listeners and viewers why that is?
And I have a personal experience. So my daughter's in college at FAU in Florida, and she went to her professor and said, I'd like to do my social work project, her culmination project for her senior year, on a program like Support After Abortion. She works for us. She's very interested in our work. And the professor said, sure. And she said, should I call it reproductive loss? And she said, no, it's reproductive justice. It's a woman's decision. So she differentiated, Kristin, in the conversation, that a miscarriage is not a choice and an abortion is, so we treat it differently. Right? So there's almost permission to grieve when you're talking about miscarriage, but there's not permission to grieve when we talk about abortion. And that's what we've seen in this more liberal research psychological world, is that people want this to be seen as a choice, and that it doesn't hurt because we want it to be remaining as a choice. And so we haven't been able to have the APA, the American Psychological Association, see abortion in a different way. Our liberal universities, some non-liberal universities, are saying exactly what they said to Callie. And because we have this frame of mind, it's hard for people to see past, like, I'm not asking you to pick a side. I'm asking you to say, hey, there's men and women underneath this conversation, their heart issue, and they're experiencing reproductive loss, grief and loss. And it's really hard because of what the culture has done to convince other people that that's not the case.
Was she able to do her project with reproductive loss?
She did not call it reproductive loss. She chose to call it Support After Abortion. But Kristin, you would appreciate this as a student. She came home, she's finding her voice. She's 22. She came home and she's like, I don't know what to say to this professor. I don't really even know what she meant. And so, of course, I was there to help unpack it, but otherwise she would have just accepted that, like many other students, as the answer. Okay. And then leave and go into social work. And that's what she believed, is miscarriage gets to grieve. Reproductive justice, it was her choice. There's not very much of a space for that. And so, or there's not loss there. And so, I was grateful to have that conversation, but Kristin, it didn't escape me that this is probably not a common conversation that students are having.
Oh yeah. I mean, I can't think of a more pro-abortion part of the population on a college campus than the social work. It's fascinating because these are people who are called to serve and support the most vulnerable in our society. They're often working with children in foster care, but then on the other hand, they're openly calling for the killing of those who may suffer. It's absolutely insane, and it's so frustrating. So I'm really glad you were there to kind of unpack that for your daughter. But Lisa, thank you for all that you do at Support After Abortion. I can't wait to continue our work at Students for Life, partnering with you through our campaign for abortion-free cities and our Standing With Her Sunday project coming up. How can folks get more in touch and kind of follow your work and hopefully get some of your updates, especially with some of this market research you're doing, which I find so fascinating?
Yeah, we're grateful for it. So supportafterabortion.com is the best place to reach out to learn all that we're doing. Social media is another great place, Facebook and Instagram. And I would say that if you are someone that is interested in really getting in and understanding, we have Healing Network provider meetings every month. Our next one is April 21st at 4 p.m. Eastern. It's an hour-long Zoom meeting where we bring best practices, essentially an expansion of a conversation like this. With other leaders, we allow for networking opportunities, question and answers, and it's really helping to us to help expand the conversation and equip people across the world to do this in their communities and have greater conversations around what does abortion healing look like, how can we do a better job, and when we are faced with people reaching out from all over, what are we going to do? And so we're really just trying to get that conversation deeper in our hearts and in our minds.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you for all that you do at Support After Abortion. Everyone, make sure you follow Lisa and her amazing team, because this is something that you are definitely going to need to have in your virtual tool belt as we head into a post-Roe America. Thanks for joining me this week on Explicitly Pro-Life.